This is Brad Bright and the God is Issue podcast, where we show how God is the issue in every issue. And by the way, a reminder to our listeners, if you've enjoyed this podcast, if it's been meaningful to you, please subscribe and then share it with your friends. You know, Dylan Mulvaney and Budweiser have been in the headlines a lot here recently. I mean, in case you missed it, which most people haven't, but in case you missed it, Dylan is a man who thinks he's a woman. He's a TikToker influencer with a huge, huge following. Now, Budweiser thought it'd be a great idea to make a digital ad with Dylan to promote Budweiser. They did it, and there was a huge backlash that ensued. And since then, Budweiser has been in full damage control mode. And that's where we are today. Now, Dylan made a fascinating statement in the midst of all this. He said, you know, God never makes mistakes. And frankly, I agree with Dylan. God never says oops. Unfortunately, we often do. But what Dylan meant is God made me schizophrenic. God created a man who believes he's a woman. Unlike Dylan, I don't think that's God's fault. I think that's Adam and Eve's fault. Now, Dylan is also a science denier. Science says Dylan is a man. But Dylan's mind tells him he's a woman. The problem is not with his biology. That's settled science. The problem is in his head. And folks, those are just the facts. Now, then a lot of the trans folks will probably call me a hater because I believe the science. You know, they're like 3-year-olds who throw a temper tantrum when they don't get their way. But folks, Dylan is broken. And it's pretty clear that he knows it. He's a lost soul who needs our prayers and compassion, not our condemnation. Let me ask you a question. If a blind man steps on your toe, does it hurt? Oh, yeah, it usually does. But here's the second question. Are you offended? Unless you're a complete jerk, no, of course you're not offended. And in fact, after the pain subsides, you say, can I help? That's what a normal person would do. Now, Dylan is blind. Never forget that. So how do we respond as Christians to Dylan and Budweiser? Well, here's the basic principle. Never compromise truth and never compromise love. State what is true, but don't berate Dylan. You know, he's horribly broken. Pray for him. He needs our prayers. On the other hand, Budweiser. Now, Budweiser is not a person who needs compassion. Budweiser is a soulless corporation whose sole purpose is to make money for investors. That's what these corporations do. So hold Budweiser accountable. If you drink beer, stop drinking Budweiser. If you have friends who drink beer, and most of us do, encourage them to drink something other than Budweiser. If you own Budweiser stock, sell it today. If you have a 401k or a 403b, contact your administrator to find out if they're invested in Budweiser at all. If they are, insist that they pressure the investment firm to divest of all Budweiser stock. And don't take no for an answer. And by the way, ask your coworkers to go with you because there is power in numbers. If you go alone, they can ignore you. If you bring 20 or 30 of your coworkers, they can't ignore you anymore. But here's the key. Do not be mean. Do not be angry, but be firm. Hold Budweiser accountable. Remember, Jesus always showed compassion to lost sheep, but he was never afraid to speak truth, especially to speak truth to power. Be more like Jesus and never forget God is the issue in every issue.